5 to 6 parts, and we'll be dealing these parts day by day. So as far as this US Constitution comes into picture, we will also be drawing a conclusion, we'll also drawing a reference from the Indian constitutional law. So this would be in fact a comparative study as well, in addition to the law what has been laid down by the US Supreme Court. So for that reference, I would like you to go through the topics that what we'll be covering through these days. So I'm giving you the basic outline, that what would be the outline of this course. So this course today, like we'll be dealing with this US Constitution, the basic introduction and what actually are the Bill of Rights. So this is the first topic that we're gonna cover. Then second comes into picture this state action doctrine and its exception. So this has been very important doctrine, what we see here in India, this Article 12, like where we see the definition of state. So similarly, this when we draw the reference of state, so definitely the Indian Supreme Court has also relied on the judgments of the various judgments of the US Supreme Court, and we would be actually looking into that what exactly this state action doctrine is, that what entities are required to follow the Constitution. And when I say Constitution, I only mean the US Constitution. I do not mean any other constitution, and we need to look into that. What are those exceptions? Now, the third thing what we'll be learning during this course would be the economic liberties under the US Constitution. So when I say economic liberties, it means the right to enter into any contract. And in addition to that, it also covers the labor law. Like what if the state government, and when I say state there, that means the respective state governments of the United States. And when I say federal government, I mean the federal government of the United States. Furthermore, we will be dwelling into the various civil and political liberties which has been granted to the US citizens by the US Supreme Court or provided under the Constitution. Moreover, when it comes this right to privacy and US Constitution, it is of extreme importance. Like we have started this privacy concept from the judgment of Honorable like Puttaswamy versus Union of India. But these privacy rights, they are deep rooted in the US Constitution, and the US Supreme Court has been interpreting this concept of privacy from a very long period of time. And we're looking at various interesting judgments of the US Supreme Court and how, in fact, these judgments have influenced the globe, the entire globe, not merely the United States. And even if we look at the Indian law regarding this abortion, when we say MTP Act, not MTP, this when it comes to this Prenatal Diagnosis Act, so therein we look into that what affect these judgments. These judgments have these global effects. Moreover, we'll be looking into these equal protection clause. And again, when it comes to equal protection of law, that encompasses something larger than the equality. That's what we have been very explicitly provided. Like Indian Constitution provides us both that equality before law and equal protection of law. But when it comes to the United States, this equal protection of law has been very beautifully interpreted by the US Supreme Court. And we need to learn the interpretation that how this equal protection has changed significantly over a period of time. The next thing what we'll be discussing here would be the Establishment and Free Exercise Clause, which is very similar to what has been provided under the Indian Constitution, the freedom of religion, and this the US Constitution, wherein it provides that how the state and the religion they need to be demarcated, they need to be separated. Moreover, we'll be discussing the First Amendment rights. In fact, they are very important rights: the freedom of speech and expression, and the rights of media under the US Constitution, which are again of extreme high constitutional importance, both from the US perspective and perspective of India. So therein, like I start with this state action doctrine. So today we are just going with a brief introduction. So this is merely a brief introduction today. We won't dwell into the technicalities, into the nuances today. We'll be only covering these broad topics. We will be obviously entertaining the queries, but I would be very happy if we discuss these queries together at the end of the lecture. Or in fact, you can mail us anytime. You can drop your queries in the chat box so that we can or either in the group WhatsApp group that has been created. So that would be a better way to manage the queries so that we can focus more on the content delivery. So now this state action doctrines come into picture, and this is very similar. Like, because I hope that you all must have studied the Indian Constitution, wherein comes into the picture this definition of state. Now, if we look at the part 3 of the Indian Constitution, that means the fundamental right parts, we have seen that it is applicable both to state as well as to non-state entities in many cases. For example, if we go about this Article 70, which talks about untouchability, this could be enforced against a non-state entity as well. And when I say state, you must have studied like what Supreme Court has already given its judgment, like what state actually means. For example, any statutory body is there, any body which is being substantially over which the government is substantive and persuasive control. So you must have seen all the tenets of the state under Article 12 of Indian Constitution, wherein the Supreme Court under Article 32 or the High Court under Article 226 may issue writs against. So this is one of the limitations of the Constitution if you go in the United States, that the Constitution applies only against the government. The Constitution applies only to the government. Now, private conduct does not require to follow the Constitution. And when I say Constitution here, I mean the US Constitution. So this court is categorically held. In fact, we'll be looking at a catena of judgments of the US Supreme Court, wherein the US Supreme Court has held that the Constitution will be only applicable on the state bodies, only on the governmental bodies, and it will not be applicable over the private conduct. But there are two exceptions. There are two noted exceptions to it. And in fact, when we'll discuss this state action doctrine, in fact, we will discuss it at length, that how these exceptions were carved, what will fall into this exception, what will not fall into these exceptions. So these are the two primary exceptions for this state action doctrine in the United States. The first is public function exception. That's the first exception. The second exception is entanglement exception. I think Yash has raised his hand. So may we please get the question of Yash?
No sir.
Yes, Banshal. Yeah, please.
No sir, वो तो गलती से हो गया था सर इसमें.
Okay, no issues. Thank you, Yash.
Okay.
So there are now
sorry, sir.
No issues. So in fact I will be sharing this entire content with our team. Samir is there. Samir has raised his hand. So yes, Samir, please. Sir, you're not audible. Please unmute yourself if possible. Not audible. I'm opening the chat box for you only as an exception, so that you can write your query in the chat box, right? So thank you, Samir. We are waiting for your question. So what I was discussing till then the Samir writer's question. We are again looking into that. We are looking into the state action doctrine, which states that the US Constitution will be only applicable to the government bodies or to the government, whether it be federal government or the state government, and private conduct need not to follow the Constitution. Now there are two recognized exceptions over here. The first exception comes into picture, this public function exception, and the second exception what comes here is entanglement exception. So these two are very interesting exceptions that has been carved out by the courts. For example, in the United States, there are many private jails. So could a private jail violate the right of a US citizen? So the Supreme Court has held that because these functions like maintaining jail is a function which is a public function which is required to be discharged by the state. But because such function is being discharged by private entities does not mean that they're not subjected to the Constitution, that they will not respect the rights of the citizen of the US of the United States citizens. Okay, he's saying, Samir is saying that it is with respect to a query that can be asked in future. Okay, Samir, we'll take it in future. I think this chat has been unlocked now. So thank you. So these are two recognized exception over here. So first thing is public function exception. Second thing is entanglement exception. And we will be dealing these exception at detail but tomorrow, probably in the lecture of tomorrow, with the help of case laws, that how these exceptions were developed. And these exceptions, in fact, you would learn that they somewhere resemble what has been defined by the Indian Supreme Court while it interprets Article 12, wherein it comes into picture that what are those exceptions, like when it says that, for example, our body is discharging any state function, so then it comes within the within ambit of Article 12. So there are many interesting judgments. In fact, one of the interesting judgments what I find on this Article 12 is BCCI versus Union of India, wherein BCCI has been recognized as a state body under Article 12. So that's a very interesting read, and somewhere being very influenced by the US Constitution, this US constitutional law. So the next thing what comes into picture is privacy. So now when I talk about privacy, so privacy now in India, we are only talking, see, there are judgments, but we are very expressing or explicitly talking about privacy from this Puttaswamy judgment. But if you look at the United States state constitution, the privacy has been deep rooted, though there is no explicit provision that is found in US constitution either, wherein it expressly provides that yes, you have a right to privacy. But the court has recognized this right to privacy, and this right is very important right, which has been recognized by the US Supreme Court and has been conferred upon the citizens, their citizens. So the first right, what it talks about this right to marriage. And we will be studying this with historical background, that while in the United States, the interracial marriage, for example, a black and a white cannot marry. Loving versus Virginia is a very leading case over this concept, this right to marriage under the US Supreme Court. And in fact, when it comes to India, there is in fact a judgment of Shafeen Zaha by the Honorable Supreme Court of India, when it says that the person has a right to choose his partner. So that has been recognized by the Indian Supreme Court as well. And importantly, when it comes to right to marriage, so the US Supreme Court in year 2015 has also recognized, has also struck down, has said the law which prohibits the same sex, the marriage between the same sex couples or homosexual couples has been held as unconstitutional by the US Supreme Court. Furtherance of this right to marriage. Similarly, a similar petition has been listed before the Delhi High Court, before the Honorable Delhi High Court, wherein this petition is being listed that whether this section 4 and 5 of Hindu Marriage Act, they are unconstitutional to the extent they do not recognize the same-sex marriage. So somewhere that what my learned friend has very rightly recognized at the inception of this lecture, wherein she said that the constitutional law is of such high importance and is of such high significance to us that it impacts our daily lives. So the first right what has been conferred by the US Supreme Court, was recognized actually by the US Supreme Court, is the right to marriage under the US Constitution, wherein the court says that you have a right to choose your partner. You have as an individual, I have a right to choose my partner. Now, second right comes into the picture, the right to procreate. That if I am in marriage, I have a right to procreate. I have right to have issues. I have right to have my progeny. So there were many states, for example, in the United States, wherein they tried to regulate, wherein they hindered this right, that the citizens could not procreate. And in fact, if you look at the United States, you must know that all states have their distinct constitution. So when we talk of the constitution, we mean the federal constitution, we mean this United States constitution, and each state has its own individual constitution as well. So we need to understand that also at the local level in the United States, there are many laws, but it is because of the Supreme Court, like the US Supreme Court, that which has been able to recognize such rights against the action of the government. So this right to procreate. The third one, and one of the important rights, that you have a right to custody of one's own children. So this has also been recognized by the court, wherein it says that if I am having some child, I have a right to have his custody. And you know that in the United States, even if you're a person who is suffering from some mental ailment, so there are laws which say that because the psychiatrists do not find you fit wherein you can raise a child, so They could ask the child, they could ask you to send the child in the foster care. So there are a lot of litigation over this in the United States. So this important rights come into picture, which says that you have a right to custody of one's own children. So now next, and we will discussing these rights in detail. Abhi, we are just merely going with the overview that what this entire course will be talking about. So in next 30, 40 minutes, we will be dealing that what this course is all about. And in fact, I will be sharing these slides with you. But in fact, if you want to have your own notes, definitely you can take your own notes. Now, the next important right is that you have a right to keep the family together. This has been one of the rights. Furthermore, a right to control upbringing of children. For example, there was a state law, I think it was Texas or some other state in the United States, where it said that a specific language is required to be learned by a child. The US Supreme Court has declared this law as unconstitutional because it violates the privacy. The court said that it is the right of the parent to choose what instruction, like it was not about the language, it was being delivered, a specific language was being taught to the children. So therefore the parents objected and the petition was allowed with the court, saying that yes, the parents have a right to choose and not to choose what their students would be learning. So in fact, parents have this right. Now this next important right is right to purchase and use contraceptives. So there has been one state in the United States which has banned the use of contraceptive, which has said that just probably with a motive that the population must increase. And the court said like whether two individuals are using contraceptives or not during their intercourse is completely their choice, and it is within their right to privacy, and a law cannot interfere over there. So the next important rights, what comes into the picture again, is this right to abortion. And a very leading case, Roe versus Wade. This right to abortion, like whether a woman has a right to abort the child she has conceived or not. And this has been a very large controversy over here. In fact, this abortion is a very interesting subject in this US constitutional law. And you all must know this. This Roe versus Wade is such an important decision, which says that the pregnancy period of this 9 months could be divided into three trimesters. 1 to 3, first 1 to 3, third month. Sakshi, she has left the meeting. Sorry. So this right to abortion, there are 3 trimesters. First trimester, second trimester, third trimester. First trimester starts from first month to the third month. Second trimester starts from the beginning of the fourth month, like third, at the end of third, and the beginning of fourth to the sixth. And the third trimester starts at 6th to 9th. So this entire 9-month period has been divided into 3 trimesters. So during the first trimester, it is the mother, it is the individual who has the choice, like whether she wishes to conceive the child or not. That's the first, that she has this right in the first trimester. Now, when it comes to the second trimester, so in the second trimester, the state, because the child, it is believed that during the second trimester, some life actually is in the fetus. So the court says the state could regulate this abortion. It could regulate, it could not prohibit, it could regulate. Okay, it could say under what condition you can go for abortion and under what condition you cannot go for abortion. So it says in the second case, you could go in the second trimester, the government, whether it be federal or state, it could actually control, it could merely regulate. Right. Now, as far as third trimester is concerned, because child has been big enough and he is having the life, so the court said that at the third trimester, the state, the government could prohibit the abortion. So this has been a very interesting right by the court in this Roe versus Wade judgment. And in fact, the very similar lines are being followed by the Indian law. So if you, Aryan, I will be providing with you this PPT. So this is again a very important right. And in fact, I will be sharing you some modules. All right. So now this right to abortion, I think is a very important right and has been very debated over this in this constitutional history of the United States. Now, third thing, what it comes into, right to refuse, right of a competent adult to refuse medical treatment. So similar case we have like the honorable. I remember the judgment by Honorable Justice Deepak Mishra in Common Cause versus Union of India by the Indian Supreme Court, wherein the court has said, wherein it provided, it actually said that you have a right to live with dignity. Wherein it said that passive euthanasia, active euthanasia, and passive euthanasia, they could be they could be allowed, but only in certain exceptional cases. So these are the cases from where the Indian, in fact, our jurisprudence is being influenced. But there is an exception over here that no individual has a right that he could undertake his death with the help of any physician or with the help of any doctor. Similarly, I remember a very famous instance from the Madras High Court, wherein an adult of age 60 or 60 to 70, he filed a petition, he filed a writ petition under Article 226 before this Madras High Court, saying that he should be allowed to die. He applied before the court. He said that, sir, I have retired, my childs are settled, and I do not wish to live anymore. I do not have any wish like which is still unfulfilled, and I must be allowed by the court that I should not it would not be suicide, like he's being allowed to suicide. He's saying that he must be allowed to die. But in a very interesting remark, the court has actually rejected his petition, saying that no individual, he has a right, even in India, and the same has been said by the US Supreme Court as well. Like being an individual, you cannot take away your own life. That, and in fact, if you look, there is a very debate around this topic as well, like whether this section 309 is constitutionally valid or not. What is the constitutionality? And then in fact, the Supreme Court has retained the constitutionality of this section 309. 309 is like attempt to suicide is a punishable offense in India under IPC 309 IPC. So in fact, any person who commits suicide is in fact, if he attempts to commit suicide and fortunately he lives, then he will be prosecuted by the state. And the very similar stand has been taken by the US Supreme Court. It says that no one has a right to die at the hand of some physician. So this has been very explicitly said by the US Supreme Court. Now this privacy further extends, and these are the explicit rights what have been provided under these amendments. So you can note down these amendments, and in fact you need to read these amendments. So this is this right to vote. Okay, that no everyone, this universal adult franchise, that nobody would be excluded out of this right of vote only on the basis of caste, creed, color, whatever, sex, right? So this right to vote, this 15th amendment. So I would request all my learners to undertake this, like to read this amendment in total, this 15th amendment, this right to vote. Furthermore, there has been this right to interstate travel and not foreign travel. Okay, so that's again a very, very interesting remark. This interstate travel in the United States. So that, because see, in India, what I should say, we have only this concept of single citizenship, right? And in fact, we have been said that okay, we are quasi-federal. But in the United States, it's the states have their constitution, and this interstate travel has been recognized by the United States Supreme Court as has been conferred and has been recognized under this right to privacy and this right to travel. Okay, that the individuals have a right to undergo this interstate travel, but this right does not mean that you have a right to go abroad. That means you do not have a right for foreign travel. So make sure this exception. And in fact, when it talks about foreign travel, you need to look into one of the very leading judgments of the Indian Supreme Court, the main Kazandi versus Union of India. And other than that, about this interstate travel, I would quote a very interesting example from Madras High Court or Karnataka High Court. I exactly don't remember, but there was a dispute during this COVID time, wherein two Indian southern states, they were fighting. They were fighting over the point that we would not allow the entry of the neighboring states into our state because they may spread and contain the COVID virus. And a very important petition was filed before the Madras. I don't remember the court. Please clarify. Please check it on live law whether it was Madras High Court or the Karnataka High Court. And it was a very, very famous. It was a very famous case. And lately, the court has directed the central government the Ministry of Home Affairs, that this blockade, what has been developed by one neighboring state, merely to prevent, merely to prevent the entry of the neighbor state, citizens of the neighbor state, and court declared it that it's not constitutionally valid. It would, in fact, violating the federal, the federal scheme of the Indian Constitution, and it directed the state central government that this blockade must be gone away, must be removed. So these are, so in fact, while we study this constitutional law, so there are numerous instances where we'll be that they somewhere resonate, they somewhere are very, very similar what we see in the Indian scenario. And these judgments will help you to build your own insights. So this would help you to learn, to learn this Indian constitutional law with a more broader perspective. So next, what I goes, this equal protection clause, right? And this equal protection clause, I would request you to refer the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. Please note down. So, in fact, I'm sharing you the link wherein you can find the entire U.S. Constitution. So, in fact, this is a website of the U.S. Congress. So, I'm dropping this in the chat box. Please, note it down for your future reference. Herein, you can get this U.S. Constitution. So you can find all the articles, like all the original articles in the Constitution over there, and all the amendments. So please look into the fifth. Do not in fact, after the lecture, you need to go to the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, wherein this equal protection of law, and which I very rightly said that is something broader than merely this, what we say, that equality before law. So in Indian Constitution, if you look at Article 40, it provides us both that equality before law and equal protection of law. So you need to look into that how this equal. In fact, we largely talk about this equality before law, but we do not talk much about this equal protection of law. And this equal protection law has been, has evolutionized in a very beautiful fashion, in a very beautiful manner over a period of time in the United States. And in fact, we study this Brown versus Board of Education. That's a very famous case of the U.S. Supreme Court, wherein the court has said that this segregation, this practice of segregation, saying black and white, is completely unconstitutional. And that was a very historic judgment in the history of the United States Constitution. So you need to look into that how earlier in the United States itself, separate but equal. What I said, please lay emphasis. Separate but equal was considered not to be violative of this equal protection clause. But the Supreme Court at a later stage of point find that this idea of separate but equal actually violates this equal protection clause. And the very leading judgment here is Brown versus Board of Education. So please, if you could have a basic overview that what this Brown versus Board of Education, please note it down. And in fact, you can go through it, Brown versus Board of Education. So there are many discriminations. And in fact, the court has said that this equal protection clause is antithesis to all of those discriminations prevailing in the society. And there is no society, whether it be Indian society or whether it be American society, we all have such social evil practices which actually discriminates, whether it be your race, whether it be your sex, color, caste, creed. So in fact, if you look at the US history, in fact, it is not as clear as it appears to us today. The history is, I could say it on record, the history is much worse than ours. So therein, this race discrimination, this practices of apartheid, and these many derogatory practices were there. And in fact, this U.S. Supreme Court, how eventually, with passes of time, recognized and abolished all such practices. So whenever I talk of equal protection clause, I mean that this federal when it is applicable to federal government, it is found under the Fifth Amendment, and when it is applicable against the state or local government, it is found in the 14th Amendment. And this race discrimination pay, I've told you one very important case. This is Brown versus Board of Education. Now, next, okay, please note it down so that I can also have a break of a few seconds. So now, next, what comes into picture? The sexual discrimination. And it is very interesting. I would this is a very there is a very recent judgment of the United States the Supreme Court, wherein it says that even discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is unconstitutional and is violative of equal protection clause. So, in fact, look at the growth that constitution, that constitutional law is making over there. Like how, whenever we talk of constitution, whenever Justice D.Y. Chanchodi talks about this transformative constitution, whenever we say that constitution is a living organic charter of rights, is a living document. So these all cases actually these all interpretations indicate that yes, constitution is not a dead letter. It's actually a organic and living and a living document. So this sexual discrimination is again which has been not authorized or not approved by the US Supreme Court, saying that it violates the Equal Protection Clause. Again, when I go into this alienist classification, when I say this classification, when we are classifying, when we are discriminating on the basis that whether you are a citizen or you are a non-citizen, we are conferring some rights, some privileges. Obviously, there will be obviously some privilege, but whenever we are, not conferring many societal schemes on the individuals only on the ground that they are not US citizens, they are not US based citizens. So the court has struck down such discriminatory practices as violation of Equal Protection Clause. And again, this Equal Protection Clauses could be asserted against the federal government as well as against the state or the local government. So that's very important. And this is the case, what I have been talking about, this Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. This is a case which actually revolves around Title VII. So what this Title VII is very similar to our Equal Remuneration Act. Okay, what it says, like no male and female, the state or any individual could discriminate them. Okay, so this Title VII is of Civil Rights Act 1964 is a law enacted by the US Parliament, by the US Congress, which says that no employer will actually discriminate against any of his employee only on the basis of sex. But in the recent cases, whenever any employee sexual orientation of any employer came before the employee obviously discriminated against him. And the court has said that this sexual discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. And the court actually uses a very interesting theory over here. And the theory is this associational discrimination theory. Please write down the name, this associational discrimination theory. Associational discrimination theory. Now, how should we understand this theory in a very, very simple manner, in a very simple term? For example, a maid is there. Suppose an individual who identifies himself as male, but he is homosexual. Okay, so sexually, I'm talking about his sexual orientation. Biologically, he is a male, but he is sexually into males. Okay, as not opposite, not into the opposite gender, not into the opposite sex. Okay. Now, if that person actually associates himself, if he marries with a male, you discriminate him. But at the same time, if he actually associates himself with a female, if he marries with a female, you do not discriminate. But if he marries a male, you discriminate him. So please understand it. If he marries a male, you are discriminating. But if he marries a female, you're not discriminating. You're saying it's okay. So how exactly are you discriminating? You're discriminating on the sex of his associate. If he is going with a male, you're not okay. But if he is going with a female, you are okay. So the court has used this associational theory of discrimination. Okay, saying that this associational theory of discrimination actually violates the equal protection of law. And in fact, has said that this Title VII in fact protects those sexual minorities having this LGBT community, this entire LGBT community, saying that you cannot discriminate any individual only on the basis of his sexual orientation. So look at such developments. But here if in India, I talk about this sexual harassment law. If you look at this 2013 Act, Prevent the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act. So the interesting thing over there is the women, like the definition of the law, it says aggrieved women. Okay, so no male actually, at least in the eyes of law, no male could be sexually harassed. Only a women could be sexually harassed. That is the premise. That is the assumption of the law. It only says aggrieved women. I think the section is 2N over there, which says aggrieved women. But complainant, against respondent. Complainant is the aggrieved women, and respondent is against whom a complaint of sexual harassment has been filed. But respondent is a gender neutral term. So respondent could be a male or could be a female. Okay, so the perpetrator of the crime, the accused, could be male or female, but the victim is only female. That is the position of law in India in the 2013 Act. In fact, there was a judgment, I don't know, remember the recent judgment of any high court, which said that this respondent could be male or could be female. The perpetrator, the accused, could be male or could be female. In fact, so this has been through judicial, interpretation or judicial pronouncements we are coming to such definitions. And in fact, we look at many, and in fact, it's very evident from many of our laws that in fact they're very gender biased. Okay. And they're not gender neutral. For example, a man could not be raped. And in fact, a petition was filed and was rejected by the Supreme Court of India, saying that we do not find any merits in it. So there is a large debate. And in fact, this petition, which has been listed before Delhi High Court, seeking recognition of the same-sex marriage under this Hindu Marriage Act or Special Marriage Act 1954, is pending before the Supreme Court. The center has filed its affidavit, and this matter is being listed before the Honorable Delhi High Court. And in fact, we are looking forward to some judgment of great constitutional importance and significance from the Delhi High Court, like it has already rendered in Naj Foundation back in year 2010 or 13. Thank you. So now next, what I was talking about, this equal protection. Therein, please wait. Yeah. Now therein comes into picture this establishment clause. Okay. It says that you have this, what should I say? The state should demarcate itself from the religious activities. What it says that there is a large wall between state and the church. Okay. That whatever you profess, you have a right to profess your religion. But there's an entire difference. Like the state could not pursue any religion. So these are the interpretation what has been rendered by the United States Supreme Court. And I remember a case, I could not recall the exact name of the case, but the facts of case were like an individual, he was found, having some intoxicating drugs with him, right? And that was punishable in law. Now he takes a defense that because of the establishment clause, this found in the US Constitution, I follow so and so religion, and this has been provided under my religion, and I'm only performing my religious activity. Swati has raised her hand. So yeah, please, Swati. Okay, Swati, could you hear me, please? Okay, she raised her hand. If you have any question or query, you can definitely put it up.
Sorry, sir, it was by mistake.
No issues. Thank you. So court very rightly said that this court would only protect such religious beliefs that are sincerely held. Okay. So these are the two important doctrines over there. The court only protects such beliefs, such religious beliefs that are sincerely held. Now, what would be sincerely held religious belief? This is to be required interpreted by the court. Now, the next important thing is that a neutral law of general applicability would not be hit because you have been provided with the right to profess your own religion in the United States Constitution. So what it says that if there is any general law, when I say neutral law, I mean any neutral law in the sense it is applicable to all. It is not applicable to a specific community. It is not applicable against certain individuals. It is applicable. It is a neutral law of general applicability. So the court In fact, this had led to a very controversy between this Congress and the United States Supreme Court. In fact, we'll be discussing this in detail by discussing this point. So these are the 2 points. The first thing it says, the court only protects such religious beliefs that are sincerely held. And second thing, what it says, the neutral law of general applicability, if there are laws that are of general applicability and they are applicable to all, they could not be hit, they could not be struck down as unconstitutional merely because they could they could actually affect your religious beliefs. So this is what we talk whenever we say about this United States constitutional law, this right to religion. So now comes into very important picture, level of scrutiny. So like from tomorrow, we will be commencing our this course. So wherein we would be actually seeing that the court is actually using this immediate scrutiny. So there is this word. Okay. So there is one more word, strict scrutiny. The court uses rational basis review. So there are 3 levels of scrutiny. So we'll be discussing these scrutiny because they're gonna be used over throughout our course. So these are the basics. Level of scrutiny. That what was the level of scrutiny that court actually used, right? So when there are 3 level of scrutiny, whenever we talk about this United States constitutional law, the first is rational basis, second is intermediate scrutiny, third is scrutiny. But before I delve into that, I wish to I wish to put forward before you this threefold test, and I found it very similar and in fact very influenced by this, by this entire US jurisprudence. What has been found in this Puttaswamy judgment, this threefold test. So please look into this threefold test. It says, first thing, like I'm reading it for your convenience. It says that in order for legislation to violate the right to privacy, it must fail the following. Okay. So it is saying that you could take away the right to privacy, but these are the 3, like first you need to satisfy these 3 points. Okay. First thing it says, legality, which postulates existence of law. आपको याद होगा योगी जी ने यहाँ पे लखनऊ में होर्डिंग्स लगवा दिए थे दंगे करने वालों के, right? He actually put up the posters of individuals who were indulged, probably accused or indulged, allegedly indulged in riots. Their posters were put up, right? And this, you remember this case went before the Allahabad High Court, before the bench of Honorable Chief Justice, then Honorable Chief Justice. So the court said, where is the law? Under what basis the government did it? Where is the law which authorizes the government to actually put up the poster of the individuals on alongside the road? So the first important requirement, and in fact, the court said that this practice is completely unconstitutional. We do not agree with it. And you must remember that in the very following days, this UP government, they promulgated an ordinance in that case. So please read that ordinance. Okay, promulgated under Article 213 of the Indian Constitution. So the first requirement is law. There must be a valid law, and law must be either passed by the state legislature or by the parliament. And this I'm talking about the Indian perspective. Okay, so your right to privacy could be taken subjected if these 3 conditions are fulfilled. So under only these conditions, your right could be taken up. Your right to privacy could be taken up in India. So the first thing it says that there must be a valid law. Second thing it says that there must be a need, there must be a legitimate state aim. What state actually wish to, obtain by entailing any such act which actually violates your right? For example, the state requires some of your personal detail in order to safeguard the integrity and sovereignty of India. The state could obviously take it because the state has a legitimate interest. The state has an aim to actually protect the integrity and sovereignty of India. Now, the third thing it says, proportionality. It says proportional, and that's again a very, very important concept of proportionality. It says that there must be a rational nexus between the object and the means adopted to achieve them. It says you should adopt only such means. आपको केवल वही तरीके अपनाने हैं जहां पे इंडिविजुअल का राइट कम से कम वायलेट हो. The state must only adopt such means wherein the rights of individuals are cut off to the minimum, cut off to the lowest. So that what it says, proportionality. जितना जरूरी है उतना. Only to the extent required, not less, not more. Obviously. And हमेशा क्या होगा? The state would actually try to curtail the rights, and it would be the people or it would be the judiciary who would actually be saving, again, you would be actually safeguarding these rights. So now comes this scrutiny, level of scrutiny under the US constitutional law, under this US constitution. So please note it down. There are three levels. So write down the first one. The first test is rational basis test. Please note it down. The first one is rational basis test. Second one is intermediate scrutiny. Second one is intermediate scrutiny. The third one is strict scrutiny. So these are the three tests. First test is rational basis. Second is intermediate scrutiny. And third one is strict scrutiny. And they are very important concepts. So even if like throughout this course, we'll be saying the court actually applied the strict scrutiny, the court applied this intermediate scrutiny, or actually the court struck down this law applying this rational basis test, or the court actually saved, court held it constitutional applying this rational basis test. So what are these tests? So these are the three tests, and this is somewhere, this is more like a concept. Okay, this has nowhere been spelled out anywhere in any judgment by the court. It is merely like more like a concept, like what the practices the court has been following over a period of time. So first says a rational basis test. So rational basis test, it is in favor of the government. Okay, so the first important thing about this rational basis test is it is generally in the favor of the government, and it is upon the petitioner, it is upon the assailant, it is upon the claimant who proves that such practice, the burden of proof is upon the person who claims that so and so law is unconstitutional. Okay, so for example, in India, I must tell you that whether it be High Court or whether it be Supreme Court, while checking the wires, while checking the constitutionality of any institute, the court always presumes it to be constitutional. I'm only talking about the law. I'm not talking about the executive action. I'm only talking about the law. Whenever there is law which has been enacted by the parliament or by the state legislature, the High Court or the Supreme Court always presume it to be constitutional, and the burden is upon the petitioner, upon the individual who claims it to be unconstitutional. So very similarly, in rational basis review, rational basis test, the court says, the court actually presumes it to be constitutionally valid. Generally, it favors the government. And the important thing here is legitimate state aim. Please look into it. Legitimate aim. Legitimate state aim. Okay, note it down somewhere that it talks about legitimate state aim. For example, kaise? The government says that every individual who is above 18 every individual who is below 18 would not be granted driving license, and any individual who is above 18 could be granted driving license. This is discrimination. The government is actually discriminating on the basis of your age, but there is a legitimate state interest. The legitimate state interest is the individual of the security of the individual. So therefore, in such cases where there is a legitimate government purpose and there is a rational nexus, there are means that has been adopted to achieve this rational object, that yes, the government had some legitimate state aim. The government in court would only have to meet this rational basis test. If the court is able to provide, if in the court the state is able to prove that yes, the state has a legitimate interest, the court would held such law as constitutional. So what I am saying, I am reading the last lines, they are of extreme importance. If any legitimate government purpose, the goal just tends to be permissible and legitimate for the government to do, in which the means chosen just has to be reasonable for achieving the goal. So there is an aim what we study in Article 14, okay, that there is an intangible differentia, that there is a sufficient, there is a distinction based on some intelligible characteristics, and there is a rational object, there is a rational nexus, and there's a rational object, and there is a sufficient nexus between the two. Okay, this differentiation and the object. So very similar. It says that there is some goal which the state needs to achieve or intends to achieve, and for it, the state has taken the permissible and has taken some reasonable steps. For achieving that goal, this test usually favors the government, and the burden is upon the person challenging the law. There are very less chances where Supreme Court declared a law unconstitutional using rational basis review. Rational basis review is tremendously differential to the government. When I say tremendously differential to the government, it means that it actually favors the government. Okay, so that was about the rational basis test. Now comes into the picture this intermediate scrutiny. Okay, now this is something. Rational basis test was the inception, was the beginning. This is something in the intermediate. This is something in the between. So something more, okay, something more than the rational basis review, but something lesser than the strict scrutiny. It says it provides government action will be held so long as it relates to an important government purpose, right? So last time what we have seen, that there was a legitimate state interest, okay, but here it comes to important government purpose. Third, when we go about this strict scrutiny, we will have a compelling state interest. So please understand the difference. The first, it talks about legitimate state interest. Second, it talks about very important thing. It says there is some important government purpose in the intermediate scrutiny. In strict scrutiny, there is a compelling state interest. For example, there is a government takes some decision which discriminates on the basis of sex or against non-marital children. Okay? Or government actually regulates certain kind of speech. What in such cases, the government merely has to meet the intermediate scrutiny, that there is some important purpose that need to be followed. So while the wires of any such law or action is being challenged in the court generally uses this intermediate scrutiny. So when a law will be upheld, so this says the law is upheld under immediate scrutiny if it relates substantially to an important government purpose. So please highlight this word important government purpose, and the court will only look at government actual purpose, and the burden of proof in such case is upon the government. What we have seen in this earlier case, this rational basis review, the burden of proof was upon the person who claims the action to be unconstitutional, who brings the challenge, the burden is upon him. But in intermediate scrutiny, there is an important government purpose, and the claim to prove that such action is constitutional lies upon the government. So I hope these two are very clear to you. The first, it says rational basis review. Second, it says intermediate scrutiny. I hope it must be clear. Now, third is very important, and it is this is strict scrutiny. So strict scrutiny, there must be a compelling state interest. What we have seen in rational basis, the state interest was legitimate. Intermediate, important. Now strict scrutiny, the state must have a compelling interest. So that's very important. Again, the burden is upon the government to prove otherwise, that no, there is this burden that there is a compelling state interest lies on the government. Furthermore, the next important thing herein is that it is not differential to the government. If court applies strict scrutiny, the case is more like the government will lose the case and citizens will win. When actually court adopts this strict scrutiny, the court will apply strict scrutiny only in cases when there is violation of fundamental rights. So please look into it. Whenever there is violation of fundamental rights, okay, and when I say fundamental rights in US Constitution, I mean first 10 amendments. All right, please read amendment first to 10 amendment. Okay, so that what is usually known as Bill of Rights. Okay, and in fact, what court has judicially interpreted and rights, like more rights out of it. There's 14th Amendment and 5th Amendment, this Equal Protection Clause and Due Process Clause. They are of extreme constitutional importance, right? So now coming back to my point. So there is a compelling state interest. The burden is upon the government. Generally, this is non-differential to the government. And when court adopts this, whenever there is violation of fundamental rights. So I'm reading it for the convenience of the entire class. It provides that action of the government will be upheld only if it is shown to be necessary to achieve a compelling state interest, not something legitimate or not something important. There is a compelling state interest that the state need to prove. The court must be satisfied that the government objective is crucial, vital, compelling, and the means chosen has to be necessary to attain the goal. Okay, and it very similarly resonates what we have seen in the threefold test, what has been envisaged by the Indian Supreme Court and Puttaswamy, that the means that government is actually using. I will definitely taking this question, Devishi. Just give me 2-3 more minutes. This is the last topic that we're going to discuss today, and we'll wrap up the class in 5 more minutes. So this, what it says, that court must be satisfied that the government object is important and crucial. For example, there is any differentiation, there is any discrimination on the basis of race, discrimination on the basis of national origin, or discrimination on the basis of non-national origin. All this what indicates? This what indicates there is a actually violation of equal protection clause. And whenever there is violation of equal protection clause, whenever there is violation of fundamental rights, the court would always apply this strict scrutiny. So it is the most rigorous type of review. And these cases are not differential to the government. Government generally loses cases whenever the court adopts this kind of scrutiny. For example, often strict scrutiny is not differential to the government and is often used under the First Amendment. First, you must look into the rights what First Amendment free, this speech and expression all provided in the First Amendment. So that's why I emphasize that you need to study these first 10 constitutional amendment of the United States. In fact, I have provided you the link in the chat box earlier. So please read them. It is used for fundamental rights under the Constitution. When the government discriminates on the basis of fundamental right, it would have to meet strict scrutiny, which I would be taking your question. But before that, I will be showing you 3 slides. Please have a look at them carefully. So this is rational basis review. Therein, there is a challenger, and it is generally in the favor of the government. That's why it is tilting towards the government. So rational basis review, weights are arranged on the side of government. There must be a legitimate state aim. Okay, and it is government which usually wins. Any issues so far? In fact, I'm reading the question of the Devishi. It says, sir, a doubt regarding rational basis review. If the state action are assumed constitutional and burden of proof lies on citizen, then how is the legitimacy of interest determined? Okay, Devishi. Also, why can't intermediate scrutiny be applied in cases of discrimination, as it is violation of right to equality, a fundamental right? Okay, Devishi. When I was talking about this presumption of constitutionality, I was talking in the Indian perspective. Okay, so whenever I talk about the presumption as to constitutionality of a law which has been enacted by a legislature, state legislature or by parliament, the Indian Supreme Court or High Court presume it to be constitutional. Okay, and this somewhere resonates from this rational basis review. Okay, so I'm just trying to connect the two. So please, these are 2 distinct concepts. This rational basis review, intermediate scrutiny, and strict scrutiny. These are the concepts. These are the tools which has been used by the US Supreme Court. I was talking about the Indian scope, right? Now your next part of your question is burden of proof lies on citizens. Okay, now we have seen in the United States, in India, the burden of proof obviously lies upon the person who challenged such constitutional law, like such law of the legislature in the courts. It is upon the petitioner to prove that such so and so law is unconstitutional. That's Indian case. But in the United States, if there is violation of fundamental rights means the court will actually adopt the strict scrutiny. And whenever there is application of strict scrutiny, it clearly indicates the burden is upon the state now. Okay, so that's more important. Now, what you said next, why can't intermediate scrutiny be applied in cases of discrimination as it is also violation of right to equality, a fundamental right? Okay, Devishi, see, the difference between this intermediate scrutiny and this strict scrutiny, please understand what is the aim of the state. Why government is discriminating? If merely it was an important government purpose, the court would actually use this immediate scrutiny. And again, when I say the burden is upon the government, whenever the court applies strict scrutiny, there is a violation of fundamental right, and the state have to prove that there is a compelling interest of the state, vital interest of the state in such differentiation or in such action or in such law, and generally in cases where this strict scrutiny is adopted, the government usually lose, and it is the citizens who usually wins it, because that what entire scheme of Bill of Rights is all about. What are fundamental rights? This is an area where the state cannot encroach. That what Article 13(2) of Indian Constitution is. It is the court which is actually safeguarding your right. That's what I've already said, that it is upon the state, as soon as power has been conferred upon the executives or the government, it is very inherent that they will try to curtail the rights of the citizen. And it is the duty, and the courts actually acts as guardian and protector to the rights of the citizens. So that's very important. I hope I must be able to answer your queries. Now this level of scrutiny, I am coming back. So rational basis mein, this generally it is in the favor of government and challenger. Okay, wait. Sir, thank you so much. I request you to add names of the cases that you mentioned today to the PPT before forwarding it to us. It was difficult to keep track due to technical glitches. Okay. So for example, I will be sharing these slides and in fact modules with you. Like after this class, probably you will get this by 8 or 9 today. And in fact, you could read it. Okay. I will share also the cases that what I have discussed today in the class. Now this next scrutiny is this immediate scrutiny, where I say that the challenger and government, they are actually obviously on the same footage, but it is upon the government to prove. The burden is upon the government, and moreover the government must prove that there is a important state interest. Next thing, whenever it comes to strict scrutiny, the government is not differential to the government. It generally lies in the favor of the challenger, and the state need to prove that it have a compelling vital interest. And there is no other way. That what the third point of this threefold privacy test judgment talk about. It says you must use such means as to curtail the minimal rights of the individual. You must take such steps. You must only curtail the rights of the individual to the extent necessary, not beyond, not more. That's why we said proportional. Okay, so the government is met with heavy burden in order to justify violation of fundamental rights or race discrimination. There is no presumption in favor of government in any such case. So with this, I think I would end my class. I end our lecture for today. In fact, we'll continue tomorrow. We'll be talking about the state action doctrine. I will be sharing you this slide and the modules tomorrow in the class. In fact, there is one more topic, small topic, which we'll be covering tomorrow because it's already 6:20 or 6:16. But I would like to have some questions, or like if you have any questions, definitely the same could be put up. Please, they could unmute themselves and obviously can go ahead with their questions or write it in chat box. So it was really, really nice interacting with all of you today. It was really a great experience for me. So thank you so much. With this, we may end the class. Have a great day. Please enjoy. Hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the learners. We hope to see you tomorrow on the same time.
Thank you.
Huh? And
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Rajan left.